Descent. The crew encounters the Borg, but they're acting weird, and so is Data.
We begin with Data playing poker with Stephen Hawking, played by himself, Isaac Newton, played by the great John Neville, and Albert Einstein, played by a guy in bad Einstein makeup.
I was so pumped to see John Neville. He was cool here too, the way he was getting mad at everyone and the whole situation.
And the scene perpetuates the nonsensical myth that Einstein was bad at math.
Data has created this poker game to see how these great minds would interact, and they do.
If two non-inertial reference frames are in relative motion...
Do not patronize me, sir. I invented physics.
And Data has to end the program when the Enterprise receives a distress call from an outpost.
They can't contact the outpost, and Worf detects an unknown ship that is not responding.
Data says there's too much electromagnetic interference to detect life forms on the outpost, so Riker takes an away team over and they find a bunch of dead people.
They split up to investigate, and Riker notes that whoever attacked only seemed interested in the people, not the station itself.
At one point, Worf says the people look like they were killed by something similar to a Ferengi phaser, which I thought was going to go somewhere, but it doesn't.
I thought the Ferengi used those weird electric whip things.
Data opens a door and finds a Borg standing there, which starts shooting at Riker. After 20 seconds, Data's super fast android reflexes finally kick in, and he starts blasting.
More Borg show up, there's a big firefight, and at the same time, the unknown ship starts firing on the Enterprise.
And during the battle, Riker notices that the Borg seem to be showing an unusual level of emotion, which is any.
One of them starts physically assaulting Data in an un-Borg-like manner, and he responds by getting visibly angry and beats the shit out of it.
The Borg suddenly beam out, and the orbiting ship also leaves through what Geordi says is some kind of subspace distortion.
And he says he'll have to study the warp data before they know anything else.
Riker asks Data what happened, and he says he got angry and asks to be relieved of duty. When they brief Picard about what happened, Riker makes a racist comment.
It was more like fighting Klingons than Borg, no offense.
He's pointing out how aggressive they were, the fact they showed concern for one another, and seemed to be acting as individuals.
And Beverly suggests that Hugh, from the episode I, Borg, might be responsible for the change.
Picard is puzzled as to why the Borg didn't try to assimilate anybody, and he wants to find out what they're up to. He gives everyone orders what to investigate, and goes to contact Starfleet.
Geordi examines Data, but neither of them can find anything wrong with him.
He asks Data how he knows he got angry if he doesn't know what angry is, and then stupidly attempts to describe feeling angry by only using other emotions as reference.
Data says he may have evolved to be able to feel emotions, which of course doesn't make sense.
But it would tie into him evolving to dream and whatever.
Yeah, I thought that's what it was going to tie into, but they didn't bring that up at any point, which was disappointing. Admiral Nechayev takes command in the area in case there is a Borg invasion, and she questions and criticizes Picard about his actions in the Hugh incident.
He argues in the same statement that he has to uphold Federation directives while listening to his conscience. But those two conflicting things are exactly the reason why he and a bunch of the other officers have messed a bunch of stuff up. Because they try to uphold Federation directives while listening to their conscience.
He says he couldn't wipe out the Borg race after Hugh had become a human individual, but Nechayev orders him to destroy the Borg if he ever gets another chance, and he says okay, showing how easily he overrides his own objections.
Data is in a counseling session with Troy about how he's been trying to feel emotion, including sexual desire, by going through Riker's holodeck playlists.
He tells her that all of his attempts have failed.
She questions why he's been avoiding trying to feel anger again, and he says it's because it's a negative emotion.
And he says he felt another emotion right after he killed the Borg. As Troy questions him, he admits that he thinks it was pleasure.
And he's worried he can only experience emotions like anger and hatred, which would make him a bad person. AKA like the rest of the crew.
The Enterprise picks up a distress call from another colony, but as they prepare to head toward it, it's cancelled because the colony had just picked up a Ferengi ship and panicked. Although I would say that's a good reason to send out a distress call.
Riker says false alarms have been a common occurrence since everyone is so jumpy, and I really liked that aspect because it showed that the threat is bigger than just what we see on the ship.
Riker comes to Picard with what Geordi figured out about how the Borg ship escaped, which isn't much. Picard yells at Riker for not having more info, then apologizes and admits he is having doubts about his previous actions regarding Hugh, saying that the moral thing to do may not have been the right thing to do.
Geordi finds Data reenacting his Borg experience and trying to make himself angry again, which was very clear, but Geordi is super confused and has to ask what is Data doing.
Data tells Geordi he wants to increase the Borg strength beyond safe limits to see if putting himself in actual danger will elicit anger, but Geordi refuses to allow him to do so.
The computer says to exceed safety limits, they need 2 senior officers to confirm, which was laughable considering how many times the holodeck malfunctions on its own. I'm surprised Geordi didn't just slam his hand against the wall and say, "Try it again. I probably broke it." It was also laughable that Geordi expressed concern over putting someone's life on the line just to prove some theory, which has also happened many times over the course of this show.
I always assumed that was proper Starfleet procedure, but apparently not. They are called to the bridge when there is another colony attack alert.
And Picard finds it odd that the Enterprise has been the closest ship both times.
They head toward the attacking Borg ship, but it disappears, and the Enterprise gets sucked into whatever they use to warp out.
And it takes them all the way back in time to the special effects from Season 2.
They end up emerging from the Ultra Warp to find the Borg ship attacking them. Some Borg beam onto the bridge, and they take them out, but not before beloved character Franklin is killed. This show will never be the same again.
And during the fight, the Borg ship slips away.
One of the Borg that beamed over turns out to be still alive, and against Beverly's discretion, Picard orders her to force him to wake up so they can question him.
He says his name is Croesus, and it was given to him by the One. He also says they don't assimilate inferior biological life forms, but instead destroy them.
Picard asks if the One is called Hugh, but Croesus doesn't respond. Picard tries pulling the Locutus of Borg card, but that doesn't work either.
He tells Beverly to do an autopsy on the other dead Borg to see if she can find anything, and the camera unfortunately stays off of her, so we don't get to see her jumping up and down in glee because she gets to cut someone up.
He also asks Data to see if Croesus is trying to send a signal to the other Borg, which you would think they would have done first.
Picard then stupidly leaves Data, the robot that inexplicably experienced emotion when next to a Borg, alone next to a Borg, who immediately pushes a button and starts talking to Data about feeling emotions.
He asks Data if he felt pleasure in killing. Data says that would be unethical, but admits that he did. He eventually asks Data if he would be willing to kill his friend Geordi if it meant feeling pleasure again, and he eventually says yes, in a pretty Lori way.
And I liked how the dude monitoring the force field just sat there during this whole exchange. It's not like they were whispering, and at one point Data was even facing him.
Must have been watching the Reverse Angle YouTube channel.
Wondering, why do these guys keep making videos?
Geordi figures out how the Borg Ultra Warp works, and says it's over 20 times faster than their fastest warp travel.
Worf alerts them to an unauthorized shuttle launch, and of course they can't lock onto it, and it was taken by the Borg prisoner and Data.
The shuttle triggers the Ultra Warp and goes through, and the Enterprise crew is too slow to try to follow them this time.
Picard finally comes to the conclusion that maybe Data not operating as expected could mean something. What a f***ing idiot.
Geordi says they have a reading of the tachyon pulse that was used to open the Ultra Warp, so they might still be able to follow.
They follow them in, but even after coming out, they can't find the shuttle. Until they do find the shuttle. It was nice filler.
Geordi scans nearby planets and finds that the Borg have apparently wiped out civilizations in the area recently, and they track the shuttle down to a planet, but there is too much electromagnetic interference to scan it.
So they decide to blindly transport down with a whole team of 6 people.
Luckily, even though there was too much interference to scan the planet, communications come through cleanly.
And they don't beam down in the middle of a volcano or something.
Well, they can still look at the planet.
Picard decides to send down more away teams and use the shuttles to move around faster, which is a good idea. Why don't they do that more?
Since they're sending so many people down, Geordi asks who will be left in command of the Enterprise, and we cut to Beverly.
Oh boy.
Picard tells Beverly to cut out immediately if the Enterprise is attacked, and take the Ultra Warp back to Federation space.
Does she have the knowledge to do it as well as Geordi?
And they don't know how to use it to get to a specific location.
She'll figure it out. The away teams are searching the planet.
Geordi doesn't pick anything up by scanning, so Picard suggests adjusting the tricorders to detect plot threads.
And Picard's team eventually finds Zordon's command center.
Inside, everything looks fine, but it's empty.
Did they alert the other away teams that they found a structure and were going inside?
That would go against Starfleet procedure. And Picard says there is a dampening field blocking their sensors, even though they couldn't scan already, so...
They're suddenly confronted by a swarm of rowdy and angry Borg.
And they shoot down the expendable crewmen in the group. Data suddenly pops out, but it turns out to be Lore.
In all his overacting glory.
Then the real Data pops out and says,
The sons of Sung have joined together. And together, we will destroy the Federation.
And we get a to be continued with a lot of background Borg cheers and yeah, let's get them high. Descent, overall.
For a season finale and the first of a two-parter, this was a huge step up from Time's Asshole, or whatever that episode was called. I was glad to see them get back to Hugh and see some after effects from that episode, and as much as I don't really care for Lore, it's cool to see him come back too. I'm legitimately interested to see how he came to team up with the Borg, but I am expecting it to not make a lot of sense, especially since the writers apparently tend to write the first part without knowing what's going to happen in the second part.
And we've also seen that when Lore shows up with another antagonist, he usually just says he ran into them, like the crystal entity.
And I especially expect Data and his newfound emotions to be explained in a way that doesn't really make sense. It'll turn out that Sung had built in some kind of connection between Data and Lore so they could be closer as brothers or something. But this first half was definitely not bad. I liked how seriously they handled things. There were a lot of things that didn't make sense, but that always happens, unfortunately. But I thought it was pretty good. I gave it a B-.
I also gave it a B-. I liked that the show made the Borg threat larger than just the ship, but it was kind of dumb that no one outside the Enterprise crew appeared again after Nechayev, even via video communication. They built it up into this big Federation-wide thing, but then it shrunk back to just the Enterprise. While Nechayev acted very bitchy and we were supposed to not like her, she had valid points, and Picard's counter-arguments basically amounted to, I'm not going to follow orders if I don't feel they gel with me personally. It was weird that an admiral standing right in his face telling him to follow the rules was the thing that made him question his past actions. The concerns the crew had, like Geordi not wanting Data to put his life in danger or Picard struggling with his Hugh decision, made sense, but not in the context of the show as a whole. If this episode existed on its own, then yes. But it's like the writers chose to ignore most of what's already happened just to create drama here. It didn't make much sense that Picard didn't have anybody keeping tabs on Data. Anytime we've seen him malfunction, it does not end well for anybody else. But this time they just raised their eyebrows in curiosity and let him continue to interact with all the ship systems. What does it actually take to launch a shuttle? They keep having these unauthorized launches, but are there any safeguards actually in place? Or is it just, well, you gotta sign this clipboard here? It seems really easy to just take a shuttle and go.
And by the time anybody reacts, you've gone through a warp portal, so it doesn't matter.
Right. And once they figure out how to get into the Ultra Warp, did they share that information with the rest of Starfleet? Seems like another crazy useful technological advance that they could use all the time.
Oh, but see, they didn't figure it out until they had already gone through.
But then they could go back, right?
I don't know, because the second time they went in, that's when they ended up 65 light years away. That was my question. They made it sound really easy to just get back, but they don't actually know how to do that.
Couldn't part of Beverly's directive be send this information back to Starfleet so then they could know how to do it?
She could just send a probe out with the information, or go back and then come back this way. I don't know.
Seems like it could be useful. You know, could go out and pick up Voyager and save them the 75 years or whatever. And I want to know if this is all of the Borg now, or just Lore's little group. And they brought up Hugh a lot, so I'm hoping he actually shows up in part 2. And I guess we see what happens when there's a red alert outside of the bridge. I was kind of disappointed that the red lights and blaring sirens wouldn't activate all over the ship, in everyone's room while they were sleeping, and in the school and everything. And I wonder if in part 2, Beverly will actually have things to do on the ship. She can get a bunch of action scenes, she can have some hand-to-hand combat with the Borg. That'd be sweet. Maybe do a Planet Terror thing where she's modified a bunch of syringes as guns, shoot them into Borg's necks. That'd be so cool.
I mean, the only thing I keep picturing is her flying the ship into a star, so I don't know. I still want to prove that force field is gonna work.